If Ukraine began the investigation into Burisma and Joe Biden in 2018 and sought to get the information to the Justice Department long before Zelensky was ever elected, where's the quid pro quo in 2019? Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about Ukraine, the impeachment, and this construction of a quid pro quo timeline, and why it simply doesn't work when you consider the order in which events occurred. Supposedly, President Trump is supposed to be leveraging military assistance to Ukraine in return for Zelensky agreeing to investigate Joe Biden and the Burisma Holdings natural gas firm. But the timeline, I don't think, allows for that. So consider the following sequence of events. On March 5th, now removed U.S. Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch to Ukraine called to have anti-corruption prosecutor Nazar Kolodnitsky fired in a speech to the Ukraine Crisis Media Center. And you can see her remarks here on the U.S. State Department website, U.S. Embassy in Ukraine. Remarks by Ambassador Yovanovitch on the occasion of the 5th anniversary of the Ukraine Crisis Media Center's founding. And in that, she stated that to ensure integrity of anti-corruption institutions, the special anti-corruption prosecutor must be replaced, and she accused Kolodnitsky of corruption. Now, she's eventually actually removed from her post by President Trump in May. And leading up to that, on March 20, then Ukrainian Prosecutor General Yuri Lutsenko told The Hill's John Solomon that Yovanovitch had given him a do-not-prosecute list. This was a bombshell of a headline, a bombshell news. This Ukrainian Prosecutor General, he's like the United States equivalent of the Attorney General, went on television with John Solomon, the Hill reporter, and said that the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine had given him a do-not-prosecute list. So that was huge scandal inside of Ukraine at the time, and it surely had reverberations. This was before the April election of Zelensky. On April 1st, Solomon also reported that Kolodnitsky had reopened the office's investigation of Burisma Holdings, and that this had occurred, and that and it was based upon Joe Biden's January 2018 statement that to the Council on Foreign Relations that about having Viktor Shokin, Lutsenko's predecessor as prosecutor general, fired. And he used $1.2 billion of loan guarantees to Ukraine on then President Petro Poroshenko, unless the prosecutor general was fired, and SOB, he got fired. That's how Joe Biden put it. So he was leveraging foreign assistance to Ukraine in return for getting this prosecutor general fired. Yovanovitch and wanted Kolodnitsky fired, who works underneath Lutsenko at the time. Kolodnitsky told John Solomon, quote, "We were able to get to start this case again, but we don't see any result from this case 1 year after reopening because of some external influence." Now, Shokin, he also was interviewed by John Solomon. He told Solomon he was removed in 2016 because of his investigation of Burisma, which Biden's son Hunter served on the board of directors of. Shokin told Solomon that he had, quote, specific plans to investigate, including, quote, interrogations and other crime investigation procedures into all members of the executive board of Burisma, including Hunter Biden. Now, Lutsenko, the one who came after Shokin, told Solomon in the same April 1 interview he wanted to give this information to Attorney General William Barr. And surely he would, with an interest of mutual legal concern. I think that you would be invoking the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty between the United States and Ukraine. Basically, we have these treaties with lots of countries around the world where we agree to participate in and to cooperate in law enforcement matters when both countries have a mutual stake in an investigation or have persons. They might need to interview somebody from the United States or something like that. Now, on April 22nd, Volodymyr Zelensky wins the election in Ukraine for president by a landslide, and he garnered 73% of the vote and he won almost every single province in Ukraine. And it was just an unbelievable, I think, outcome to see such a huge landslide. And he was running on an anti-corruption platform. He was running on a peace platform to end the civil war in eastern Ukraine, and try to get Crimea and Donbass back into the possession of Ukraine. And so the Poroshenko administration was just annihilated by Zelensky, who was just a comedian on television. He actually starred in a television show where he basically accidentally becomes president. And so then I guess someone said, you know what, you'd be doing a better job than Poroshenko, so you should just run. You'll win. And he surely did win. Now, he wins the election on this anti-corruption platform. Now, on July 18, President Trump and Office of Management and Budget Director Mick Mulvaney put a pause on U.S. Military aid. This story breaks in August 28th. But the pause actually had started in July. And we know that from Bill Taylor's he's the acting ambassador to Ukraine that came after Yovanovitch's his testimony to the House Intelligence Committee on October 22. He says that the date that the pause on military assistance was a week before this July 25 phone conversation between President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And so this is where Zelensky actually thanked the United States for military assistance. And you can actually look this up on the whitehouse.gov website. This conversation was declassified on September 24, but the conversation took place on July 25. And so continuing with the timeline here, but also quoting what Zelensky says in thanks to U.S. for military assistance. He said, quote, "It turns out that even though logically the European Union should be our biggest partner, but technically the United States is a much bigger partner." Trump and Zelensky then each requested mutual legal assistance under the treaty. Trump first asked for Ukraine to assist with Attorney General William Barr's ongoing investigation into the origins of the Russiagate conspiracy theory that was peddled by intelligence agencies and the Justice Department, falsely accusing President Trump of being a Russian agent and his campaign. The investigation would go on for 3 years, and ultimately Robert Mueller's special counsel report came back and said that there was no conspiracy. Now, Zelensky pledges on the phone call to help out with the Russiagate origins investigation. He said, quote, "Yes, it is very important for me, and everything that you just mentioned earlier for me as president is very important that we are open for any future cooperation. We are ready to open a new page on cooperation and relations between the United States and Ukraine. I also plan to surround myself with great people, and in addition to that investigation, I guarantee as the president of Ukraine that all the investigations will be done openly and candidly. That I can assure you." Now, later, when the topic turns to corruption in Ukraine, Trump asked Zelensky about Burisma and Biden, saying that it sounded horrible. Biden getting the prosecutor general fired, and Trump thinks that sounds corrupt. And Zelensky says that he confirms that his people were already looking into it, and that this investigation into Burisma was essential to his administration. Quote, "I understand and I'm knowledgeable about the situation. Since we have won an absolute majority in our parliament, the next prosecutor general will be 100% my person, my candidate, who will be approved by the parliament and will start as new prosecutor in September. He or she will look into the situation, specifically to the company that you mentioned in this issue. The issue of the investigation of the case is actually the issue of making sure to restore honesty. So we will take care of that and work on the investigation of the case." Now, Zelensky, in turn, asked the United States for assistance with that investigation, and he confirmed it. "On top of that, I would kindly ask you if you have any additional information that you can provide us. It would be very helpful for the investigation to make sure we administer justice in our country." At this point, now, Zelensky is unaware that there's been a pause in military assistance. On October 12th, the anonymous whistleblower, he alleged that the intelligence community's Inspector General's office, that Trump was leveraging the military assistance. And this was the August 12th complaint from this anonymous CIA so-called whistleblower. that uses hearsay. He says he wasn't a witness to the events. And so he's conjecturing that this pause in military assistance has to do with Trump's conversation with Zelensky. You see the transcript, and there's no pressure. There's nothing in the transcript that shows Trump saying, if you don't give me a Biden investigation, we're not going to give you military assistance. Now, in August 28th, Politico breaks the story publicly that the United States is withholding military aid. And then a day later, per Bill Taylor's October 22 testimony, on August 29, Ukraine finally learned of the pause. They saw the Politico story and they said, hey, what's going on? So here's what Taylor said. Quote, Mr. Yermak, which is Zelensky's personal aide, he contacted me and was very concerned, asking about the withheld security assistance. The hold that the White House had placed on the assistance had just been made public that day in a Politico story. So since that time, the Defense and State Departments had finished their review of the military assistance, and on September 11th, the $250 million was released. And so the issue was kind of settled. Now, then President Trump, a few days later, about 2 weeks later, he meets with Trump and he says, nobody pushed me to probe Biden. And there was no pressure. Quote, nobody pushed me. We had a great phone call. It was normal. The Justice Department spokesperson, Kerry Kupek, then confirmed the investigation dutifully because there was this specter of, is the Justice Department looking at Ukraine or not? And the Justice Department does what it almost never does. It confirmed the investigation. Quote, a Department of Justice team led by U.S. Attorney John Durham is separately exploring the extent to which a number of countries, including Ukraine, played a role in the counterintelligence investigation directed at the Trump campaign during the 2016 election. While Attorney General has yet to contact Ukraine in connection with this investigation, certain Ukrainians who are not members of the government have volunteered information to Mr. Durham, which he is evaluating. So here you have the Justice Department confirming that, yes, in fact, that conversation between Trump and Zelensky that had substance to it because Trump is asking for mutual legal assistance on the Russiagate investigation. We're confirming to you that the Russiagate investigation is looking at Ukraine and potential role that it played there. Now, on September 26, John Solomon reported to at the Hill that prosecutors have been attempting to get information about Burisma and Joe Biden and Hunter Biden to the Justice Department since 2018. So a year before Zelensky is ever elected, it turns out that Ukrainian prosecutors, reportedly, if you're going to go with John Solomon's reporting here, and it's been pretty solid so far, have been investigating this since 2018. Quote, Ukrainian prosecutors say they have tried to get this information to the U.S. Justice Department since the summer of 2018, fearing it might be evidence of possible violations of U.S. ethics laws. First, they hired a former federal prosecutor to bring the information to the U.S. attorney in New York, who they say showed no interest. Then Ukrainians reached out to President Trump's personal lawyer, Rudy Giuliani. And so this information starts to come into Giuliani and President Trump's radar. And this played out as the prosecutor general was going to John Solomon and saying, we need to get this before the Justice Department. William Barr needs to see this information. And then later, on October 9, John Solomon reported on Fox News that U.S. intelligence agencies were aware of the investigation into Burisma before Zelensky was even elected. This means that the United States, its intelligence apparatus, national security apparatus, and maybe even the State Department were aware of this. Quote, the U.S. government has had open source intelligence and was aware as early as February of 2019 that the Ukrainian government was planning to reopen the Burisma investigation. This is long before the president ever imagined having a phone call with Zelensky, because Zelensky hadn't even been elected yet. That wouldn't happen until later in April. Now, coincidentally, that was right before Yovanovitch had tried to get the same Ukrainian prosecutors pursuing the Burisma probe fired. In February, they're saying that the U.S. intelligence becomes aware of the fact that they're reopening the Burisma probe. And then surely enough, Yovanovitch is making the remarks that they want this thing shut down. And I think that that's certainly coincidental and would raise a lot of eyebrows when you combine it with the fact that then the prosecutor general's going on television saying that he was given a do not prosecute list. It's a massive scandal, and clearly Ukraine's trust with Yovanovitch had been completely compromised, particularly at this prosecutor general's office. But in the conversation between Trump and Zelensky, they're both talking about how each of their ambassadors to each other's country were actually just no good. And so everyone's replacing their ambassadors in and around Ukraine and the United States. And so there's clearly something going on there. Finally, on October 22, John Ratcliffe, he's the Republican congressman out of Texas, and he actually questioned Bill Taylor in the closed-door session. We got the opening statement, and he says that the mainstream reporting, quote, that Taylor provided evidence of a quid pro quo involving military aid is false. I questioned him directly on that, and under Adam Schiff's rules, I can't tell you what he said, but I can tell you what he didn't say. And neither he nor any witness has provided testimony that the Ukrainians were aware that military aid was being withheld. You can't have a quid pro quo without quo, Ratcliffe said on Fox News. So let's just review the timeline again, and I'll leave you with the close here. So if the investigation by Ukrainian prosecutors into Burisma and Biden began in 2018, when they began trying to get the information to the Justice Department, 2, the U.S. became aware of that investigation at least as early as February 2019, 3, the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine tried to have those same prosecutors fired in March 2019. 4, the Ukraine prosecutors are on the record on March 20 saying the same ambassador gave them a do not prosecute list. And in April again saying they were trying to get the same information to Attorney General Barr, all before Zelensky was elected. And then after Zelensky is elected, Trump in July has his conversation when Zelensky confirms that the investigation is already underway and he requests the United States mutual legal assistance with it. 6, the Ukraine does not find out about any delayed military aid until August 29th when the press published it, which is ultimately released on September 11th. And then finally, Zelensky says there was no pressure to pursue the investigations his own prosecutors had already initiated. Then where's the quid pro quo? No, it's not in a time machine. It simply doesn't exist. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and have a good day.